All right. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to the West Virginia Watershed Network's webinar series, Nonpoint Source Program Approaches to Reducing Fecal Coliform Pollution. This is the first of 5 weekly webinars that are going to provide tools and information to help watershed organizations reduce non-point source fecal coliform loads in streams. So my name is Jenna Dotson. I'm the staff scientist at West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and I also help coordinate the West Virginia Watershed Network. Just a little bit about the network. The West Virginia Watershed Network is a network comprised of nonprofits as well as state and federal agencies who support the work of watershed organizations across the state by providing resources and opportunities for collaboration. So we're really excited to provide this fecal coliform webinar series for you all. And before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. So as you can tell, we're in Zoom webinar. Slightly different from Zoom meetings, so attendees' videos are off and the microphones are automatically muted. We are recording this webinar as well, so we'll send out the recording to everyone who registered, along with any relevant resources that our presenters share. And then as far as questions, if you could please type any questions that you might have throughout the presentations into the Q&A box that's found at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. And you can put questions in there anytime. We're going to have 3 speakers today, and we'll have 2 kind of question sessions. So after the first 2 presenters present, we'll have 1 Q&A session, and then we'll have another Q&A session after our final speaker as well. So with that, I will pass it over to Martin.
Hi, I'm Martin Christ. I'm with the West Virginia DEP Watershed Improvement Branch. I'm based in Fairmont. And I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, which is Kristen Bison. She is a conservation specialist in the West Virginia Conservation Agency based in Martinsburg with the Eastern Panhandle Conservation District. And her presentation is West Virginia Conservation Agency Section 319 Non-Point Source Septic Program.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I'll show you the outline of my presentation here. I'm going to do a brief overview of the septic pumping and repair programs that the Conservation Agency offers. Then I'm going to go into some considerations that watershed groups or other nonprofits can take if they're thinking of developing their own programs, and finish up with some frequently asked questions and other tips related to septic pumping and repair programs. As Martin said, I'm based in the Eastern Panhandle, so I do offer septic pumping and repair cost share programs in this area. Along with that, I'll also work on other conservation projects targeting non-point source pollution. And then the Conservation Agency as a whole does a lot of work in the agricultural sector, offering agricultural cost share programs. And then later on, after my presentation, Martin is going to introduce my colleague, Kara. She's down in the southern part of the state. And so just being in very different parts of the state, we kind of have different situations that we run into, maybe slightly different perspectives on how these programs run or the best way to do things. So I have asked Kara if, as I'm going along in my presentation, anytime she wants to pop in and give a different perspective or add something in, I'd welcome that. So you all might be hearing from both of us throughout this. So to get started here, the Conservation Agency offers septic pumping and repair programs in certain watersheds within the state. These watersheds have fecal coliform bacteria impairments. And then in order to offer these programs, we utilize 319 funding. To be eligible for that, a TMDL needs to be written for the watershed, as well as a watershed-based plan. So as I said, we fund these through the 319 program. This is federal funding that comes from the EPA. DEP is the entity that administers that for our state. So we're working directly with DEP to apply for this funding. It does require a 40% non-federal match. So for the total of your grant, 60% can be federal funding and 40% needs to come from a non-federal source. The types of programs we offer are cost share programs, meaning we will pay for a portion of these practices and then the participant will pay for a portion. So for our septic pumping, we offer 50% of the cost of pumping up to a certain dollar amount. In some places will go up to 150, and other places will go up to 300, just depending on the average cost of pumping in that area. That is a reimbursement grant, meaning the landowner needs to pay the septic pumper up front. Then they submit our paperwork to us and we will reimburse them that 50% cost share. For repairs, we offer a couple different kinds of programs, again, depending on where you are in the state. Some of them, it is a percentage, 75% of the cost of repair, up to $6,000 for a class 1 system or $10,000 for a class 2 system. And Kara is going to get into what those are a little more in her presentation. We also offer a program that will pay up to $7,000 after the landowner pays an initial $500 towards the cost of repair. For these repair programs, we do pay the contractor directly, so the landowner doesn't need to pay for all of that upfront and then get reimbursed. And if you see me looking to the side, I've got my notes page up on another computer over here. So just a little bit about our application process. We have a paper application that the participant will need to fill out, and this is for pumping or repairs. Repairs are a little more involved. We do require that the county health department perform an inspection of their system to verify it's failing. This way we know that our money is going to a needed cause. They don't just want a new system for whatever reason. And we do require that the landowners submit a copy of the form from the sanitarian that says their system is failing as part of their application. We also require that they obtain at least 3 estimates from certified septic installers for the cost of the repair, and they need to submit those to us as well as part of their application. The applications are then approved by our local conservation district boards. They generally approve the lowest cost contractor. And after that, the landowner is entered into a contract with the conservation district as well as the selected contractor if it's for repairs. For pumpings, it's just between the district and the landowner. So I did want to point out sometimes we do have exceptions to that 3 bids rule. At least in my area, I've run into the issue a few times where landowners are unable to get 3 estimates. They'll be trying for months to get a hold of contractors, get them to come out and give them an actual estimate, and they're not able to do it. And so I just have them document everything, keep in touch with me. If they've been trying for weeks or sometimes months and they've reached out to a couple dozen people, and they're only able to get 2, most of the time our district board will allow that application to move forward and just approve the lower of the 2 estimates that they submit. So after we approve their application and enter them into a contract, the landowner will schedule the work. So they'll get with a septic pumper and schedule the pumping. They'll pay the pumper at the time of service. And then for repairs, the landowner will work with the approved contractor to schedule the work. And then the contractor will bill the landowner for their share and bill us directly for our share. So then for the actual payment process, for pumping, the landowner will send in the invoice that they paid the pumper, as well as some invoice paperwork that they need to fill out and send back. And then their payment is approved by the Conservation District Board and we send them a check. For repairs, we require that the health department performs a final inspection before the system is buried. We require that final inspection form along with the contractor's invoice before we'll consider it for board approval. once we get all of that, the board does approve it and we send the contractor a check. And at this time, we also have the landowner submit all of their invoices, proof of payment, anything else that we can use as match for the grant. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit of what you all might need to consider if you're thinking of developing your own programs. So I know this presentation is a little wordy, but it's going to be sent out to you all, and I want you to be able to refer back to it as a guide. So I sort of tried to include all the important points on here. So I'm just going to be going through them. Again, if you have any questions, type them in the Q&A chat. But we'll start with eligibility. So you want to start this program and you want to use 319 funding. The first step is that you need to be working in a watershed that does have an impairment for fecal coliform bacteria. That is determined by DEP. Once it is determined that it has a fecal coliform bacteria impairment, the watershed will need to have a total maximum daily load written. If you're not sure what that is, we also call it a pollution diet. Just to boil it way down into simple terms, it basically says how much of certain pollutants we are allowing to go into that impaired waterway so that it still meets its water quality standards. So we know how much we need to reduce of the fecal coliform in order for the stream to become unimpaired. So once it has the TMDL in place, a watershed-based plan needs to be written and approved. And that watershed-based plan will just basically go through and detail exactly what the partners in the plan are going to do to reduce that bacteria and other pollutants affecting the watershed. So once you have all of those in place and approved, you will submit a work plan for each 319 grant proposal. So the points I have here, these are the big main items that you need to include, but this isn't a completely inclusive list. So of course, it needs to have projects that are going to reduce non-point source pollution. So as I mentioned, for repairs, it needs to be done on septic systems that are failing. We can't spend that money on people putting in a new septic system. It needs to be a source of pollution that we're going to fix. Your budget, again, needs to include that 40% non-federal match. You'll need a timeline for implementing your work plan. So, you'll lay out for 2 or 3 years, by this time, we want to have this many repairs or pumpings done. And then 6 months later, you want to have, another amount done. Calculations for fecal coliform bacteria reductions. Kara's going to get into those in a little more detail later. But you are going to be able to work with your basin coordinator or other resources to figure out those. And then, of course, a water quality monitoring plan. And this just shows that, whatever work you're doing, you can see that reflected in the health of the stream. So let me see here. So going back to the grant proposal, some other things that you're going to have to include are some background information on the watershed, partnerships that are going to be involved, public education and outreach efforts you're going to do. You want the grant proposal to be cost effective. I mentioned the timeline. You want it to be achievable within a reasonable time frame. And then ideally something you can build off of in the future. If you want to be offering this program for years to come, maybe start out small and be able to add to that with later grant proposals. Okay, so once you are awarded a 319 grant, there are reporting requirements. You'll have semi-annual reports that you'll submit to DEP, and these are to track the progress of your grant. And then at the conclusion of the grant, you'll have a final report that you submit. 319 grants are reimbursement grants, which means either you'll have to use funds that your watershed group already has to pay participants up front, and then your group gets reimbursed from DEP, or you'll have to wait to pay the participants until you submit the invoices from the participant to DEP and get the payment from them. So the invoices you submit to DEP do require some different paperwork that I've listed here. An invoice cover sheet that will show the cost share totals, contractor invoices, sanitarian inspections, any paperwork related to, why this invoice is being paid or was paid. And then you'll also need to submit match. And then once you get the presentation, there's a hyperlink there to get more information. Okay, so the budget can be one of the most difficult things to work through when you're developing your grant. One of the big things that'll trip people up is that match amount. So again, that needs to come from a non-federal source. So that could be any funds that your watershed group has that you spend towards achieving the goals of this grant. The homeowner funds, so we do cost share programs, and we can count whatever the homeowner paid towards the pumping or the repair as match. You can also use in-kind match. So this is time, mileage, equipment usage. If anyone's volunteering their equipment, you can count your time for meetings your group has where you discuss this grant, project management time if you have folks spending a lot of time on it, mileage, traveling to and from project sites, anything else. You can also count time from partners as long as their time is not federally funded and they don't claim that time for any other grant. So it doesn't need to be just the watershed group. It can be other folks that are helping you out as long as they are okay with you using their time as match. And then down here, these are the resources that I use for in-kind match. So I'll use the value of a volunteer hour to count time at meetings or anything else with folks. So the current rate you can see there is $26.67 for West Virginia. And then the mileage reimbursement rate is 67 cents a mile. So, for example, if I have a meeting and there are 6 people there and we spend 2 hours discussing a grant, I can, take those 6 people 2 hours and count that for 12 hours of volunteer time. And you can see how you get the dollar amount there. So also as part of your budget, you're going to want to decide your cost share rates. So I gave you 2 examples that we do. You could do a percentage of cost, or you could do a fixed dollar amount. In order to do this, you really need to know what the cost of the pumping or repair is going to be in your area. So it can range really widely, as you can see here. I would suggest trying to talk to some local contractors and see if you can get an average cost, or it might just be something that you need to start out with your first grant with your best guess, and then sort of, change it up for your next proposal to get something more accurate. I did want to give an example of something that another group did one time in this area. They did not do a cost share with landowners. They actually cost shared with another septic pumping program that was in the area. So this group went 50-50 with this other group to pay for septic pumping completely for landowners. And they did this because they wanted to target a really low income area of the watershed, folks that, probably couldn't afford to get their septic pumped, couldn't even afford to do 50% of it, but your septic still needs pumped. And so they were really successful with that grant. They partnered with the septic pumper in order for the pumper to go out and go ahead and do the work and then bill these groups afterwards to get paid. And we did only have one septic pumper working in that area, so that made it a little easier. But just to give you an idea of some different ways you might think of how you're going to run the program. You'll need to determine how many repairs and pumpings you want to accomplish. Just look at the numbers and see what seems realistic with how much match you're going to need. And then what other expenses do you think you might need for the grant? Outreach materials, are you going to be printing things, mailing out mailers? For water quality monitoring, you might need equipment or analysis at a lab, or even have a contractor come out and do the work. And then there also may be other resources that your group can look into. And one of them I have here is the on-site systems loan, which I'll mention a little more about here later in the presentation. And I apologize if my voice comes and goes. I've been fighting off a cold this week. So you'll want to create some program forms, and this will include an application, contract, approval letter, invoice form. So I'll go through all of those individually. So for your application, the elements you want to be sure to include are, of course, the contact information of the project manager. So it'll probably be best if you have, maybe one point person for the project so that all inquiries go to them and they're able to give people information consistently. Eligibility requirements. So you're going to say on there, you need to be within this watershed, contact the project manager to be sure. You might be able to include a map of your watershed as well. And then you want to put on there the steps that the applicant needs to take to complete and submit the application. So again, another example for repairs, they're going to have to include that health department inspection as well as those 3 contractor estimates. And then you'll also want to put on there what the next steps will be. Once their application gets approved, what's going to happen next? When are they going to hear from you? What's the follow-up going to be? We also like to include an information packet with our application. It includes some septic education. So that link there will take you to an EPA website that has tons of flyers and brochures and everything all about septic maintenance, how a septic works. So you can sort of pick and choose what might be best for your project. Include a list of local septic pumpers. That health department may be able to help with this. It seems like out here in a lot of areas, we just have 1 or 2 that are operating. So that makes it kind of easy. A list of septic installers. So the health department should have a list of this because you need to be certified in West Virginia in order to do this work. So they should have a list of everyone operating in the county that is certified. And this link here will take you to the statewide list of certified installers, and you can just go through there and pick out the ones from your area as well to create your own list. And then this is the on-site systems loan program down here that I mentioned earlier. So this is a long-term low-interest loan offered from the DEP and West Virginia Housing Development Fund. And this can be used to repair or replace faulty septic systems. So this might be able to be used by participants if they are unable to pay for their cost share amount. They could maybe use this loan program to cover that portion. Then next we have a contract. So once someone is approved, we develop a contract. And what this contract does is just basically says, we are going to pay this certain amount and the participant is going to do this work. They're going to get it pumped or the contractor is going to complete the work, and they're going to submit all of their invoices. So again, for pumping, the contract should be between the participant and your group. For repair, it would be between you 2 as well as the approved contractor. All parties need to sign this before any work takes place, just to cover all of your bases. So, make sure that they're not starting to dig or getting their septic pump before this contract is in place. And then super important, include a timeline for completing the work. So for ours, we give folks 60 days. This is really important because these funds a lot of times are limited. So once you allocate them, you might have to start turning people down and they have a deadline. They need to be spent by a certain time. So if you have someone that signs up for the program, says they're going to get their septic repaired, sits around for 6 months and does nothing, you want a way to prevent that and move on. If it seems like they're not going to get the work done, you need to move on and find someone else who is, so that you get the money paid and people who need this program to help fix their septics are able to get that done. So we will also send out an approval letter once their application is approved and contract is in place. And this is just the next steps that they should take. Tell the landowner it's up to you to schedule this, explain how they're going to submit their invoices for reimbursement, or how the contractor is going to submit directly to you. And then again, reiterate that timeline for completing the work in this letter. And then we also send out an invoice form. So we ask that folks return this form along with their paid invoices. and it'll show the cost share amounts on there. So that way the participant knows exactly how much to expect when they do get paid. And they will also sign it to certify that the project is complete. Okay, so partnerships and outreach, I combine these because a lot of times they really go hand in hand. I think partnerships are super important for any 319 grant, or honestly, a lot of conservation work that we do. But especially for something like this where you're going to need a lot of outreach. One of the big partners that helps us with this program is the health department. You're going to want to start conversations with them early, just explain to them what you want to do, make sure they're on board with it, because you are going to have to talk to the sanitarian throughout the process when they're out there inspecting folks that are signing up for your program. The health department can help with outreach. They could either keep copies of your application at their office to hand out to people, or they can refer folks to you. I've had both. I get a lot of calls from people who originally called the health department and then they told them, call me. I think you might be in this watershed. You might be eligible for this program. They're also going to be your resource for technical information and questions and just tricky situations that come up that have to do with the science behind septic systems. Also, it's a good idea to reach out to your local septic pumpers and installers. Again, make them aware of the program and they can help with outreach. And then the watershed-based plan usually has an extensive list of partners involved in creating it. So you can also ask them to help with outreach, and there might be some groups in there that could help with other aspects of the grant, like monitoring, or if you need an address list for sending out mailers, someone who could do GIS work to get you that list. And then I listed down here just a few outreach ideas. So, you could do print advertising in newspapers. You could do a direct mailing, a postcard to everyone in the watershed that might have a septic. There's online advertising on Facebook. I think you can even pay to get a YouTube ad pop up within a certain area. We've done roadside signs, door hangers. You can maybe do radio ads, and then seminars or workshops. So we've done this before where we have invited people to come out and learn how their septic system works, what they should be doing to maintain it, and then learn about these cost share programs as well. I will say you definitely want to provide food with these, because otherwise you're not going to get people to come. It's going to be, after work, after school, on a weekend, whenever that's their free time. Really, you need the food there to attract people. You're not going to be able to use your federal funding to pay for food. You can never use that to pay for food, in most instances, but you are able to use your receipts for, however you did pay for that food, to use that as match. And then let me see here. So some other things you can think about outreach and advertising. It'll just depend on your area, really. Is word of mouth going to work? Maybe you have grocery stores or elsewhere that you could post flyers. QR codes, like we had at the beginning of this presentation, those are free to make. So if you have a website for your group or somewhere that they can access information about the program or the applications online, you can go to a lot of sites online, make that QR code for free and put that anywhere. And then, of course, track your time doing all of this outreach. Whatever you're doing, you can count that as match. And those in-person events, you can also count any participants who come. You can count their time as match as well. So make sure you have them sign in. All right. So now I'm going to move on. Over the years, it seems like I get a lot of the same questions from participants. So I just wanted to throw those up here and sort of go through the thought process behind answering them. People want to know, of course, the timeline for all the different steps of this process. So as a group, it would be a good idea to determine how long each step is going to take and make that clear to the applicant. So for us, our conservation district boards meet once a month, and it's usually the same day every month, the third Wednesday of the month. So we tell them ahead of time, it's going to be approved the third Wednesday of the month. You're going to get some paperwork after that, or you're going to get your check after that. Be clear about how they're going to receive communication and follow-up paperwork. Is it going to be always in the mail? Are you going to email it if they prefer? And of course, how soon are they going to receive it after each step is completed? So, once they're approved, how soon are they going to receive the contract and all of that? So who approves all of this? So for us, like I said, it's the conservation district boards. For your group, you might want to think about, is there one person you want to designate to do this? Or do you want the watershed group board as a whole to vote to approve each one? My personal opinion, I think it adds sort of a layer of security to have the entire board make these decisions. And in that case, the contract would be signed by the board chair or a designated representative. And that's just so, if something goes wrong in the process or the participant isn't happy, they can't blame it on one person. You have this whole group of people that is, moving their project through the process. Can I get reimbursed for pumping my tank before applying? So determine how you want to handle this. We don't allow it just because it makes it difficult to allocate these funds when they're limited and other folks want to sign up. And also, I think it just kind of defeats the purpose of the program. We really think about these cost share programs as encouraging folks who wouldn't usually pump or repair their systems to go ahead and do it because, they're getting some of it paid for. So if someone had already gone out and pumped their tank and then they find this program and they're like, oh, can you reimburse me? I got it done a couple weeks ago. Then it's like, well, you were going to do it already. So, is it really a best use of your funds? All right, so how often can they pump their tank? We don't have a rule on this just because we don't really see people pumping more often than they need to, but you can determine if you want to make a rule. So the recommendation is to pump every 3 to 5 years. So you could, base it off of that. And then can they pump multiple tanks? So we do allow people to apply for multiple septic tanks if they own multiple ones, but each one does need its own application. So here, I mentioned this earlier, they called so many contractors, still can't get 3 estimates. So like I said, sometimes we'll run into that. I have started telling people when they first apply, just go ahead and record, before they apply, when they reach out to make sure they're eligible, to go ahead and start recording exactly who they called or contacted for estimates, when they did it, what the response was, if they got a response, whether they showed up to give an estimate or not. And again, I'll just determine, like, if it seems like they put in a good amount of time and they're just not getting anywhere, I'll go ahead and present it to the board and see if they'll allow it to move forward with just 2. So a lot of the initial calls I get from people are, calling saying, hey, I'm seeing this or that with my septic. Like, is it failing? Do I need to sign up for this program? So it's a good idea for you to go ahead and be familiar with how septic systems work and what the common signs of a failing septic system are. Kara's going to go through some of this in her presentation. And then also I found that a lot of times the septic pumper is able to tell them if it's not working correctly. So if they're already due to be pumped soon, you might suggest that they go ahead and do that first and see what the septic pumper says. And then remember, you do not have to be an expert. You have the health department who is an expert in these matters, and they are going to be the ones who make the final determination of whether the system is failing or not anyways. So if there's some question that you really, you're not sure of what the answer might be or what to tell them, you can go ahead and have them reach out to the health department, or you can, and get their opinion on it. And then, of course, separate from people calling and asking questions, if you ever have questions or issues, make sure you're comfortable reaching out to the health department to talk through them with them. And then this last one is just kind of a silly one I've gotten once or twice. Someone just moved into their house, it has a septic system, and they want to replace it because they just moved in and they want everything to be new. Can they apply to replace it? Well, of course, if it's failing, yes, but otherwise, no, they can't. And in these situations, it's really just a matter of educating these people. pretty much every time they've never lived anywhere with a septic system or anywhere near septic systems. So you just need to educate them on how it works. Be ready to have resources that you're able to send them or direct them to so that they can understand what they need to do to maintain their septic. And then just a few other things about the program before I wrap up. This note here, the folks that do receive the cost share payments are required to report this as a taxable income. So you'll want to refer to DEP's 319 program page for more information on how to handle that. Try to be consistent. So, try not to change the program too much from grant to grant, from year to year. This will help keep things consistent for potential participants. Their neighbor got this done last year. Can I do the same thing? You don't want to change it up a whole lot. You can also rely on old advertising. So if you sent out postcards in the past and someone might have it stuck up on their fridge for the next time they need to get pumped, you don't want to constantly have to tell people, well, we've changed it now. Saying that, if you're just starting out, it might take a little bit to figure out what works best for your area. So, I don't want to say that and make you afraid to change it. Of course, you need to sort of alter your program to figure out what's really going to be most effective for your area. But, try and get a lot of this worked out at the beginning. And then be careful about allowing exceptions to program rules. I know I just gave a couple examples of allowing exceptions there. But in general, you want to set a precedent of sticking with your rules. One thing I didn't mention earlier, this is another exception to the program rules. The timeline for getting the work done, I mentioned 60 days. I have run into a couple times with septic repairs where they weren't able to finish it in that time frame due to weather. They weren't able to work in the ground, or materials being on back order. They couldn't get those in time. So I allowed that to go beyond the 60-day timeline, as long as the contractor was in contact with me, told me what was going on. We check in every week or every couple weeks just to make sure they haven't thrown this to the wayside and they're ignoring it. They're actively trying to get it done, but there's extenuating circumstances preventing that. So the last point here, again, track your time and match from the start. This is really important because you'll find that all these little things really add up. And if you get to the point where you're submitting your first invoice and you want to go ahead and submit some match, you'll be trying to go back through your calendar. Like, did we have a meeting then? How long did that last? Who was there? So just try to figure out a system that works best for you from the start. Excel spreadsheets are great for this. Some people still want to do it on paper. Just try to cover all your bases of any match you might be generating from in-kind, as well as funds that are spent by the watershed group, and that'll really prevent a headache later on. All right, for repair participants, again, they're required to submit, if it's a cost share program, submit proof of their payment that you can use as match. So just explain all of this from the beginning, that they need to be keeping track of this. The health department inspection does have a cost, so you'll want to be upfront with them about that. Sometimes they might need to get the system excavated. That could be a cost they can count. Anything they do that's working towards the repair might count. So I just have them go ahead and keep track of everything, send it all to me, and I can always go through and figure out what counts and what doesn't. And then finally, be prepared to deal with contractors or participants who don't end up fulfilling the contract. So they don't follow through on getting pumped. The contractors don't show up to do the work. They aren't responding to you. You'll need a way to terminate the contract. Google is a great way to figure out examples of forms or wording you can use. And for the participant who has a contractor that falls through on a repair, figure out how you want to handle them moving forward. Do you want them to get 3 new estimates, or do you want to see if the second lowest estimate that they originally submitted is still willing to honor that price? And I sort of lean towards that second option because the participant has already been through a lot, and we just want to get the work done. So these are some additional resources that might help everyone. We've got some DEP links here. links to the EPA's website on the 319 grant program. I did include another example of a septic program here. Canaan Valley Institute offers one in Berkeley County. We also have Blue Ridge Watershed Coalition is a watershed group in the area that offers a septic pumping cost share program. I know I saw John Maxey on the list. I'm not sure if he's logged in, but you can try and look for examples even outside of the state of other local groups doing programs like this. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And also thank you for explaining so much about the Nonpoint Source 319 program. And I am putting into the chat a list of basin coordinators who will be happy to tell you more about the 319 program. Okay, our next presenter is Cara Grosso. She is also a conservation specialist. She's based in Lewisburg with the Greenbrier Valley Conservation District. And her presentation is West Virginia Conservation Section 319 Non-Point Source Septic Program, Part 2. Go ahead, Cara.
Thank you, Martin, and hello, everybody. Kristen gave an awesome overview of the programmatic details. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the fecal coliform monitoring and then a little bit more about septic systems themselves. So I work in the Greenbrier Valley Conservation District out of Lewisburg, and we cover Pocahontas, Greenbrier, and Monroe counties. Currently, we have 319 septic projects going on in 2 watersheds. The 319 program works on the watershed scale, so either on the hydrologic unit code 10 or 12 scale. So the ones that I'm showing here in red are both HUC 10 level watersheds, and that's Anthony Creek and the Indian Creek watershed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fecal coliform, which is the metric that we use to indicate and measure septic and sewage pollutants in our streams. And fecal coliform bacteria can be measured or modeled. So the measurement unit is colony forming units per 100 milliliters of water. When water quality standards are developed, they're developed in these concentrations. So the EPA recommendation for body contact is less than 200 CFU per 100 ml of water. The 303D lists and delisting decisions are based on concentration. So before a TMDL is developed, DEP will go out and take direct measurements of fecal coliform at individual assessment points. And based on those concentrations, they'll make that decision to put the stream on the 303D list and develop a TMDL. The TMDL itself is based on modeling. So modeling is based on loading, which is the total amount of the pollutant in a volume of water. So you can indirectly measure loading by measuring the discharge and the concentration of a pollutant. The TMDL model is developed from a lot of different variables about the watershed. So it's going to include geology, climate, which includes precipitation. It's going to include land use, and all kinds of different data goes into this model. So it's generally pretty accurate. And then this is the goal that we're working towards when we're reducing the fecal coliform loading in stream. And then to collect data, so if you're going to go out and measure, you're going to determine whether you want to send your data to WQX. So Martin, if I may ask you to give a brief description of what WQX is, that'll help everyone understand whether they want to submit their data to WQX.
I call WQX the EPA's water quality database in the sky, in the cloud, essentially. Yeah, it's a national database of water quality measurements.
So you don't have to submit your data to WQX if you're monitoring your stream in your watershed. It's just a way to communicate with others that you've done these studies and for them to go and see what kind of data you are getting. So if you're going to be setting up a monitoring plan in your watershed, you're going to think of a few things at the beginning. So first, you're going to determine the scale of your study. Will you monitor a single tributary, or do you want to go for the whole watershed? Do you want to monitor on the hydrologic unit code 12 or 10 scale? You're going to think about your resources. So how much time and how much energy can you put into the monitoring plan? As I have found, it takes a little bit longer than you expect it to once you actually work through it. So it may take a little more personnel or a little more time than you initially thought it would. Will you hire a consultant or delegate duties within your volunteer group? And then you want to consider your goals. Again, do you want to add the data to WQX? If you do, then you'll have to develop a quality assurance project plan. If not, that's okay. Is your goal to delist the stream? So if you do want to delist the stream and present West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection with data for a delisting decision, it will require an intense monitoring plan developed in a partnership with DEP. So you would determine the original pre-TMDL monitoring sites and then develop a monthly or more frequent monitoring plan at those sites. Is one of your goals to refine the watershed-based plan? So whenever you're doing these non-point source projects in a watershed, you're going to be making improvements, and you'll probably be modeling the improvements, which we'll talk about a little more later. But if you're going to be measuring the improvements, do you want to use that data as a way to narrow down work areas and try and figure out where you want to focus your outreach efforts, for example? And then what parameters are you interested in, and do you have the capacity to measure? So if we're doing septic projects, we're definitely going to be looking at fecal coliform. And DEP suggests to pair total suspended solids with fecal coliform because this is a little bit of an indicator of the stream stage. Other parameters that you can look at are dissolved oxygen, conductivity, temperature, pH, and turbidity. So a few more considerations if you're choosing to measure improvements to your stream. Fecal coliform have growth or die-off based on the stream conditions and time as it moves downstream. So a couple of examples of things that affect die-off are UV exposure and cold weather. For example, we do a monitoring plan in the Second Creek watershed in Greenbrier and Monroe County, and we saw higher fecal coliform counts in the warmer months, but in the cooler months, we have seen hardly any fecal coliform in the water. So you definitely want to consider doing your monitoring over all months of the year to cover all seasons and all temperatures. Another thing to consider when you're setting up your monitoring plan is the amount of recent runoff and water in the stream, because this affects the concentration of fecal coliform. So it's best to monitor at a range of stream stages. You want to measure at low water flow, which would be base flow, after a little bit of rain and after a lot of rain. So you would collect samples, as I said earlier, of total suspended solids kind of as your way to indicate that you have had high or low flow. And then a consideration with dilution, since we're measuring a concentration of a pollutant, generally you would think that more water would mean the pollutant is diluted, but with fecal coliform, more water means there has been more runoff, so it's carrying more waste into the stream. So you can actually see a higher count of fecal coliform. And then for analysis, fecal coliform samples have a 6-hour holding time. So from the time that you collect your first sample, you need to be able to collect all the rest of your samples and get those samples to the lab so that the testing can begin. And then if you are going to be uploading to WQX and following your QAPP, you'll be using a certified lab. If that is not your intention, you don't have to use a certified lab. Modeling load reductions is done by linking a calculation or an expected reduction with a BMP. So the DEP has developed a dimensional analysis to model fecal coliform load reductions for these septic projects. So there's a model for repair and replacement of septic systems, and then a model for pumping. So the variables that go into this equation are days per year, gallons per person per day, milliliters per gallon, colony forming units, in 100 mills on average, people per house on average, and then the efficiency rate. So this comes out to a calculated pollutant load per house per day for a failing septic system. And then for a septic system that isn't necessarily failing, but it just needs to be pumped, it's the same equation, but instead 25 gallons per house per day instead of 50, and then it only has a 50% efficiency rate. So these are the load reduction estimates that you would report in your semi-annual and final grant reports. And that's going to be based on the number of projects completed during the reporting period. For 319 grants, you are not required to monitor. You are only at least required to model. So while you can monitor as part of your grant, and we would definitely encourage that, that can be a separate grant if you want to do several septic repair grants and then choose to monitor later once you think you've made good progress on the watershed. Some signs of a failing or outdated septic system. Sewage backing up into the house. I've had instances where it's backing up into the bathtub, and we can do emergency contracts to do those repairs that day or the next day. You can smell sewage outside, so sometimes the sanitarian will send their report to me and say, yeah, I opened my car door and could already tell it was failing. The lawn is soggy, or you can see extra dark grass growing around the drain field. There's visible water pooling on the drain field. There's a straight pipe coming out of a bank directly into a stream. There's sewage draining into a cesspool, or as you can see here, a failing open septic tank. Or the system was installed prior to 1982. So that was when septic system installation required permitting in West Virginia. Systems prior to that year generally were not permitted. So the photo on the right here is a failing system that we worked on. The sewage was backing up into the basement of the home. So they cut off that pipe that led into the basement and started running the sewage through these white PVC pipes out of the window. So that was a pretty bad one. A little bit about Class 1 and Class 2 septic systems. Class 1 are generally considered conventional systems, and they're the most common. It consists of a tank and a drain field where the effluent filters through the soil that is there naturally. The effluent's gravity fed, and it percolates through the soil until it reaches the groundwater where it has already been cleaned. So the bacteria and the different sand and clays in the soil and organic matter filter out anything harmful in the sewage. Sometimes soil has a low percolation rate, or the water table is too high for these Class 1 systems to work. So in that case, you would have to put in a Class 2 septic system. And what that is an alternative method. Instead of a gravity-fed field, you can add peat moss, you can add an Elgin system, or for example, you can add a mounded system. So in a mounded system, you would bring in that clean fill and create your effluent filtration, and then you would pump that to the top of your mound and let it percolate through before it hits the groundwater. Now, these Class 2 systems cost about twice as much as a conventional system, and septic installers also must receive special certification to install a Class 2 system. So this is a photo of a Class 1 system that I did here in the Greenbrier Valley. It's on the left, a septic tank being installed, and then on the right, one of the drain lines. So the length of drain lines you're going to need depends on how many bedrooms your house has. And then this is an example of one of those mounded systems where they brought in fill material to filter the sewage through before it reaches the groundwater. A few frequently asked questions. How did we do outreach? Kristen covered a few of these. We do every door direct mail, word of mouth, and community boards. I've had the best luck doing outreach just through contractors, talking to people who call them about a septic problem. The sanitarian will get called to come out and look at a system, and he'll tell the landowners about the program. The local watershed association has helped post advertising on community boards, and then sometimes if somebody gets a project done, the neighbor will go over and say, hey, I saw you got your septic system installed, and they'll talk about the program that way. Because sometimes for example, we have a perched water table in the Meadow River watershed, and a lot of people need a class 2 system over there. So sometimes a whole neighborhood could need new septic systems or are having problems. So that word of mouth goes a long way. How did you supply match? Kristen covered this as well. Landowner portion of the cost is our biggest factor for these projects, but also time and mileage and other projects in the watershed. How long to catch on? About a year, give or take. It really depends on how many people you can get to latch on in the beginning, and then that word of mouth is kind of a domino effect. Who did we partner with? DEP, the county sanitarian is definitely a huge partner in this. Local contractors, and then watershed associations. What are the requirements for the landowner? They're the biggest player in this. It's kind of their job to come in and complete the application, express interest in the program, and then stay on task with getting the program or getting the project completed. So schedule the sanitarian visit, get estimates from the contractors, schedule the work, provide us with updates, and submit invoices for reimbursement. Sometimes we'll talk a little bit more in depth with the sanitarians about a situation, but generally their report is pretty comprehensive and explains why the system is failing. Also, if you want to go out and take a look at the septic system, the sanitarian is generally happy to go out there and meet with you. Do we pump tanks where there should not have been a leach field? So this would be a scenario where the septic system is failing, or it should have been a class 2 system and it's a class 1 system, but maybe the landowner can't afford to do a replacement right now. So yes, we will cost share on pumping regardless of whether the system should be replaced or not, just to benefit water quality a little bit at least. What would you change about how we run these programs? My biggest lesson learned has been always meet with the landowner in person to explain the program. This is because I've had situations where I did it by mail or by email and the landowner didn't quite understand that they should wait until we've entered a contract to start the work. So then, unfortunately, the way our program is set up, we can't pay a landowner retroactively for a project that they have done. So it's always best, in my opinion, to meet with the landowner and explain the packet and have them apply in person. What changes in the creeks have we seen because of these septic programs? We haven't specifically monitored yet for septic. We've monitored so far for ag, and we have seen improvements. As far as modeling goes, we have modeled quite a bit of load reduction in Indian Creek, which is where we've been doing the septic program for several years. So DEP has discussed water quality monitoring effort in the Indian Creek watershed this coming summer, and I'm really excited to see if we're seeing improvements there. And that's it for my presentation.
Thank you very much, Kara. Okay, the floor is open for questions. Right now we have no open questions. Does anybody want to shoot a few in? If not, then I will introduce Dennis Burns. Dennis was a conservation specialist until recently, also in the Greenbrier office. And we dragged him into this series to talk about agricultural best management practices. And he will do that in 2 weeks on 2/22. But now he works in the DEP as an environmental resource specialist in the underground injection control permit program, which is also relevant. And his presentation is Understanding the UIC Septic Systems. Take it away, Dennis.
Thank you, Martin. Am I unmuted here? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So I just posted in the chat a couple of handouts there. One is a template for a groundwater protection plan, something that is required with UIC permits. And the other one is a general fact sheet for just some good practices for protecting groundwater. So when we talk about UIC, probably wondering why are we even incorporating that into this conversation? But what a lot of people don't realize is that if you are working with a septic system program, some septic systems do need to be permitted under the UIC program. These are, well, trying to, there we go. All right, I know what I'm doing, really. So the UIC program, if you're not familiar with what that is, again, like Martin said, it stands for Underground Injection Control. And this is a federally mandated program in the state. It actually falls under the Safe Drinking Waters Act, not the Clean Water Act, like the 319 program that Kristen and Kara were just talking about. And the state has primacy to inspect and enforce these types of programs. Septic systems are actually considered to be a Class 5 underground injection control well. That is a shallow underground injection well. We actually have 6 classes, everything from injecting hazardous waste to things that deal with mining and gas production, to even Class 6 is for carbon sequestration, liquidizing carbon dioxide into or putting it into really deep wells. If I'm talking 5,000 feet deep for carbon sequestration. Some other things that are similar to septic systems that are also considered Class 5 wells, geothermal, again, wastewater disposal from a septic tank, stormwater disposal in many cases are all very similar types of systems. And I've even seen some stormwater systems that look exactly like a septic system. They are just for stormwater. And these are all types of systems that need to be permitted. From a septic system standpoint, what we're talking about are systems that have the capacity to handle 20 people or more in a single day of the year. So if you're into one of these programs that Kristen and Kara was just talking about, and you have a business, say, it could be a restaurant, a hair salon, any place, a convenience store, a lot of times will have a restroom that could have 20 people or more going in and out of it. Anything that is not a single family residence and has the capacity to handle 20 people or more in a single day must have an additional permit through the DEP on top of the permit that they have from the health department to install their septic system. Now, when I say this is for single family residences only, or I'm sorry, this is not for single family residences. I'm talking about an individual home. If you have a trailer court where you have multiple trailers all plumbed into the same septic system, or a housing development where multiple homes share a large septic system, those are all permittable UIC wells. Sometimes you'll run into what's called a home aeration unit, which is essentially a little miniature treatment plant that is in an additional tank to the septic system. And if those have a surface discharge, then those would require a NPDES permit, which is a Clean Water Act permit. But if it is an underground discharge, and we do have quite a few of those that have the home aeration units and the underground discharge, then those would also require the UIC permit. And the purpose of these permits is to make sure that these large capacity systems are being maintained and function properly, so you don't run into a system that is failing down the road. The problem is a lot of people are not aware that they need this permit. So a big part of my job is just going out here and hunting these places down. Restaurants, if you do have UIC permit, you will be required to have a grease trap. And that's also something else to consider, even on a non-UIC permitted septic system. If someone is putting a lot of kitchen waste into their septic system, just a good management practice on that is to have a separate basin to capture any grease or things like that coming out of kitchen waste. Point operated laundromats. If you're in a very rural area and the owner of the local laundromat says, "Hey, I need help with my septic system," it doesn't work. Well, I wonder why. And someone's probably a lot of antibacterial products down the drain. A coin-operated laundromat itself is actually a non-permitted discharge, which means they're not allowed to have a leach field. They could have a tank in the ground that all those fluids drain into, and they have pumped very frequently, but they cannot have a discharge into the groundwater. And that's regardless as to how many people would be utilizing that septic system. Other types of facilities, hair salons, for example, you've got chemicals from hair dyes and different things like that they're putting down the drain. These are all non-permitted discharge. So again, they would have to have a separate tank other than their regular septic system to take fluid from their waste, or I'm sorry, from their sinks. So if you run into that, make sure they understand you cannot put these things into a septic system. Kennels. I was just in one the other day where the septic system was failing, had been failing for a long time, water running over the ground for about 50 feet or more before it actually sank ground, was right up out of their leach field. And what was happening was they did not have any kind of filters or anything in place to prevent any solids from going into their tank. It plugged up the leach field. The septic tank would not actually start functioning correctly because it just the microbes in the septic system were not able to work. So again, kennel waste is another one of those prohibited discharges, but you can get around that with a groundwater protection plan. And what that groundwater protection plan would have to say is that you're going to have filters in place to where only liquid waste goes into that septic system from kennels. You don't want to get your hair, you don't want to get dog waste, anything like that going in there. So some of the things that are required if you do have a UIC permit, visual inspections, that's monthly and annually, and a person needs to send those inspection forms in whenever they renew their permit every 5 years. So the visual inspection is typically walking out over the leach field doing, okay, does it smell? Yes or no? Is the ground excess wet? Yes or no? Something real similar to that. And those things are all spelled out in the permits. Sampling, some of our permits do require frequent sampling depending on what the pollutant is that we expect to be going through that system and the flow. Larger systems, larger flow, we do require more sampling. Storm drains are not allowed to be plumbed into those systems. Roof gutters are not allowed to be plumbed into those systems. We do require a barrier to prevent vehicular traffic. So it can be anything from a fence, a ditch that keeps a vehicle from driving over it. Some places, depending on what they're used for, I've even been real liberal and allowed someone to put up a sign that says, do not drive over this area. Something that prevents people from driving over and damaging the leach field. Cannot pave over the injection point. You'd be surprised how many places we go to just to inspect even a permit that's in place, and their injection field is underneath a paved driveway or a parking lot or something like that. And we find there's a lot in places that are not permitted too. Cannot allow vegetation to grow within 10 feet of the injection point. A lot of times we'll go out to places and we have to point at trees, brush, and say, you got to get this cut down. But those are all management things that are in the permit that are required of the permittee. So if you're working with somebody and you think that they may require a UIC permit, once they get their septic system put in place, these are all things that they need to be aware of that they need to do to manage that system. There are fees involved. It really depends on the size of the system, how much filtration is in place. That fee can be anywhere between $25 and $2,500 for the initial application fee. Normally, most of them are around $300 or less. Then there's an annual fee that will go along with that, which is a percentage of that initial application fee. All of these permits do require a groundwater protection plan. And like I said, I put that in the chat. You can download that and take a look at it. It's a template for not just a UIC permit, but in general, small businesses that have the potential to contaminate groundwater should have this groundwater protection plan on hand. And then there's also a requirement that if public sewer does come through the area where the UIC permit is, that you have to close out that UIC permit and hook up to public sewer. And I've got several places right now that I've been on to people that their permit's up to renew, and we're not going to let them renew it. We are forcing them to hook up into public sewer. So that is another thing that people need to be aware of before they go into this type of permit with this type of system, if they expected public sewer to come through, in the near future. So that's the quick and dirty explanation of UIC. My phone number, as well as the other UIC inspector's phone number, is on the top of that the handout that I posted in the chat there. So if you have any questions, feel free to call us. One thing I'm not asking you to do, but by talking about this and this type of webinar, is to go out and try to police the neighborhood and call us and report people. I'm not asking you to do that at all. That's a good way to get people not to work with you on your program. But what I am going to ask you to do is spread the word and let people know that these are requirements, and highly encourage them to call us and help us get them lined out with the appropriate permits. Thank you. Martin, we'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Dennis. That was very informative. We are going to transition now into our Q&A session. If there are questions, the presentations have just been so thorough. There's very few questions. Just praises.
I
I
have
have a question for Dennis.
Sure.
When you say, all right, now asking for a friend, when you say keep woody vegetation away from the injection point, is that just the start of the leach field, or is injection point, does that cover the whole leach field?
That covers the entire leach field. So a lot of times what I tell people to do is get you a 20-foot piece of string and have a person on either side. You walk down the center of that leach field around or down where each line goes. You may have several leach lines, and make sure that anything that you cross with that piece of string or rope or whatever you're crossing or carrying, you need to cut it down, spray it, do something to get rid of that woody vegetation. Because what's going to happen there is those roots are going to get into your leach lines and plug things up and cause a failure.
Thank you.
just adding on to that, Dennis, I've also heard it's really important to keep the grass over your leach field mowed. Some people just want it to go wild. They're like, well, that's my leach field, I'm not going to mess with it. But that prevents evaporation from the soil, correct?
It can. It really depends a lot on what kind of grasses that you have. Because most of our grasses have really shallow root systems. Some of the warm seasons will get a lot deeper root systems. Wetland plants, particular, a lot of times have deeper root systems. Like your deer tongue grass or reed canary grasses will have deep root systems. Switchgrass, things like that are real deep. But if your septic system is working correctly, you should not have the environment for wetland plants to grow there. And then, if you can just keep like a good, fescue or bluegrass turf over top of that system, you shouldn't really have a problem with grass roots causing any damage.
Thanks, Dennis. We also have a question from John here, a general question regarding type 2 systems. He says, surrounding jurisdictions bar approval of mound systems in areas with steep slopes or with unreliable power. Would it require legislation to add these in West Virginia?
I'm not sure. Just thinking about a situation where you would have that. If you're on a sloped area, I don't expect to see a perched water table. And if it's too sloped, I don't expect to see a house. So I think in those situations, you would generally have a conventional septic system, but if you were to have a sloped area that needed a mounted system, there are systems that don't require power, like I think the peat moss systems and the Eldon systems, I don't believe, well, they do require power, I guess. I'm not sure to answer the question. I'm not sure if Kristen or Dennis can chime in, or Martin, on any of that, but when it comes to the legislative side, I'm not sure.
John, what are you calling surrounding jurisdictions? Are you talking about other states, or are you talking about just local municipalities around you that have an ordinance against that? Virginia and Pennsylvania. Okay. Yeah, I don't know that there's anything restricting that in West Virginia. Really, what it comes down to is the health department approval. If the health department approves it, then you can do it. But if the health department doesn't approve it, then that would bar anything.
Okay, I have a question from Tommy, the Western Basin Coordinator in the DEP. Some of her watershed groups have issues working with their local health department and sanitarian. Any advice on that? Or do you have experience to pull from?
I have one situation I've run into with that. In one of the counties, they weren't quite as easy to work with as another county. I ended up having to change the application process for our program a little, in terms of getting the sanitarian to go out and do an inspection. They didn't do it. If someone called, they wouldn't do it. They did it whenever the homeowner or a contractor applied for a permit. Then they would come out and inspect. And she said, in their words, it works the same because they're never going to issue a permit unless the system is failing. So we had to sort of change that up to have homeowners, one way or another, get a good sense of, is it failing, talk to us, talk to the health department, and then go ahead and get contractors to come out. So just another little side note, a lot of times the sanitarians, at least in our area, will say that they are not experts on the inner workings of septic systems, and that these septic installers will know a lot more by just looking at a situation because they have so much experience with it. So if you start getting contractors out there and they're saying, yes, it is an issue, this is the fix I think it's going to be, then we just suggested they went ahead and get 3 estimates, and whoever the lowest one was, we would approve, and then they would go ahead and apply for that health department permit that would trigger the inspection. So we just sort of had to change up our system with that way. It doesn't run as smoothly as the others. But when it comes down to it, it is West Virginia law that you need to be managing your waste in a way that does not impact the environment or public health. So if someone does have a non-functioning septic system, it is the health department's job to, if they catch it, make sure it's documented, make sure these people know it is law, you need to get it fixed. So, I'm trying to think if there's ever a situation where they would sort of try to shirk that duty. But I feel like these programs and that particular mission of the health department are trying to achieve the same goal. So you might just need to ask them, we're trying to do this, what works best with you all in terms of how this partnership can work. Kara, I don't know if you have any other experiences.
No, I think you covered it very well, Kristen. The only other experiences I've had is maybe I'm working with the sanitarian on a project, and they maybe forgot to send me a report, and I'll just have to reach back out and remind them. But continued communication has been really important, because sometimes the sanitarian doesn't realize that you're working with someone on on a project and they think they're just doing an inspection for the person and don't realize that they need to send you the report. So just, give them a call or an email whenever you have a question and continue that communication.
I'll just back up what they just said. I remember years ago working on a program like this, and the sanitarian in that county was upset that there was a program for that because they were worried about how much extra workload it was going to put on them for doing design work and things. Turned out it really wasn't any extra workload at all. But that was a big concern of theirs, and they felt like the county should get paid extra for the extra workload and things. But what it comes right down to is exactly what Kristen just said. This is the role of the health department. This is their responsibility. If someone wants to install or alter or do anything to that septic system other than pump it, they have to have health department approval, and the health department has to go out there and do that. So if you're getting a lot of slack from the health department, they are overseen by the county health departments are overseen by the state health department. And you can always make a call there and say, hey, I'm not getting the service that I need. What I've noticed over the years is that the mindset, and I don't know if it's a generational thing of sanitarians, has really changed in the past 20 years. Because 20 years ago, it seemed like the sanitarians in the state were making up the rules as they went along. Here lately, it seems like there's a lot more cooperation by the younger generation of sanitarians who have come in and kind of understand that role a whole lot better than that older generation did.
Thank you all for that. There's one question. I know Carrie answered it in written form, but maybe we can also have it in spoken form for the recording as well. So the question is from Tom, and it says, can class 2 systems be used for more than one household?
So to my knowledge and in my experience working with the sanitarians doing these systems, neither a class 1 or a class 2 system can serve more than one household. The drain lines are designed based on how many bedrooms and how many people are expected to live in that individual household. We have had scenarios where there were houses that shared a septic system, and that was considered a failing system. So we were able to go ahead and cost share on one of the systems being installed, and then the homeowner was on their own for that second system because we were correcting the overloaded system.
So I'll add to that a little bit. So they can share a system. There are a lot of situations like that around the state. But again, like Kara's saying, if they're not designed correctly, you are going to overload that system very quickly. So if it's a housing development or a trailer park or something like that, then make sure that you do have a good design on that system. Make sure you've got plenty of leach line. And 9 times out of 10, those situations will require a UIC permit. And in that situation, we're going to look very closely at what the health department has designed to make sure that it is going to function appropriately.
All right, thank you. If there are any other questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. But in the meantime, we just want to thank everyone for attending this webinar this afternoon. The next session of this webinar series is going to be next Thursday, February 15th, also at 2:30. And we'll be hearing from James Summers from the Water Quality Standards and Assessment section. We'll be talking about source tracking and also review the latest fecal coliform data from around the state. And then Martin will also be talking to us from the Watershed Improvement Branch about cluster systems. So if you haven't already, please make sure you're registered for next week's session. I believe Martin just pasted that registration link in the chat. And then also, we encourage you to sign up for the WaterNet, which is the West Virginia Watershed Network's newsletter. It's a quarterly newsletter that has resources and opportunities for watershed groups. And sometimes we also highlight successful watershed groups projects, which sometimes can include fecal coliform related projects. So there's always opportunities to learn and knowledge share in that newsletter as well. So Martin just put the sign up link to that in the chat as well. And then lastly, if you have any other topics that you would like the Watershed Network to host trainings for, please send us those ideas. Martin will pop my email in the chat, and you can email me with any future training topics that you would like us to hold some training series on. And then I don't see any more questions. And so with that being said, I just want to thank everyone, including our panelists and speakers today, for attending, and also the attendees for your wonderful attention and all of your great questions. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you, everybody.